Hey, Earthlings, welcome, welcome, welcome. So, Ronnie, you're well.
I
Who's that?
am,
Who's that?
and so is Misty here.
Oh, that's
Very
Misty,
well
right?
too. She's just
Okay,
had her dinner, so she's quite happy.
the mysterious Misty.
Yes, she'll be
So,
the star,
welcome everybody.
of the show.
So, Ronnie, you were so keen to prove that you were still alive that you went to a conference.
I
That's
kind
right,
of
isn't it?
did, yeah. In Manchester, it was it weekend before last? The Vegan and Animal Rights Conference, the first one, was held at the hotel in Manchester.
Okay, well, we'll have a little report from you, but I think we should celebrate still being alive first. So, I'm challenging my Benny Malone. Have you been watching him playing these drums on social media?
I've seen a bit of him drumming. Yeah,
Yeah, his kit is getting bigger and bigger.
Oh, really? And his drums, I suppose.
Well, yeah, but he's got two bass drums now and a couple of crash cymbals. So he's getting very Keith Moon.
Blimey.
So hello everyone. So let's just check in who we have. Deb was first. So hello, Deb. The spiritual vegan. Hi, Jennifer was next. Linda. Hi, Linda. Terry. Regan. Kate J. Regan.
It rhymes with vegan.
The Regan. And then Joanna. Hello, Joanna. So, yeah. So we've been trying to teach ourselves how to do this again, Ronnie.
Yeah, I know. We haven't done it for about 4 weeks because, I mean, we've got other stuff going on. So this show's not been so frequent recently. And I think it's been about 4 weeks. So I had to think about how to put everything together, set up everything for it. It was like trying to remember after such a long time.
I had to think about all the buttons to press. So
I know.
So, Ronnie, you went to this conference. So it was the very first one, Vegan and Animal Rights Conference.
Vegan Animal Rights Conference. It was a 2-day conference, Saturday and Sunday, weekend before last, in Manchester. And I didn't have very much experience of the conference as a whole, really, because I was part of a panel there of like long-term activists, and this took place on the Saturday, and it was let me just find the title of it here. Yeah, it was called From the Front Lines, Perspectives of Long-Term Activists, and there were 4 of us on the panel. It's myself, Mel Broughton, Amanda Richardson, and Tom Harris. It was chaired by Ben Newman from Animal Rising.
Yeah. So hang on a second. So Mel is what? Still sabbing, is he? Or
Mel Broughton's is mainly sort of kind of famous for the Speak campaign, campaign against the building of the primate laboratory at Oxford University, although he's been involved in a wide range of various forms of activism. But it was kind of, each of us represented, I suppose, a different decade. Well, certainly in terms of when we started our activism. I was the 70s, Mel was the 80s, Amanda was the 90s, and Tom was the 2000s. And so we kind of, each of us, it started off with each of us talking about our particular decade, in terms of the animal rights movement.
Yeah, so it was like a historical review, I suppose.
Yes, it kind of was, and of course mine was really about, really when the kind of in a sense probably the birth of the animal rights movement in the 1970s. Although I think the author Bridget Brophy first wrote about animal rights in about 1965.
65, yeah.
Series of articles, didn't I? I think it was published in the Times.
It might be in the Sunday Times, I think.
Or Sunday Times, yeah. But it was a concept that really, kind of, bit up a head of steam in the 1970s, and then the term speciesism was coined in the 70s by Richard Ryder, and first of all, in articles he wrote, I think he wrote something in 1970 where he mentioned speciesism, and then in 75 his book Victims of Science was published, where he kind of went into it more.
Yeah, that's right.
So, and then he had the ALF, obviously, began in the 1970s. So it was a kind of hotbed of activity. It was a hotbed of change, really, in terms of what you might call the animal protection movement.
Yeah. So what was the idea for you to say how stuff from back there would be relevant to now?
Well, I think it would have been good if it got onto that. The problem is because it was an hour, it was only an hour long, and there was four of us, speaking about our particular decade. By the time we'd done that, and then there had to be time for some questions. I think there wasn't a lot of time for questions. I think probably about four people asked questions. It wasn't.
You must have run over, Ronnie.
Sorry?
You must have run over.
No, because there was another talk immediately afterwards, so you couldn't really run over.
Yeah, but I mean, I can't even keep you down to an hour.
No, and we haven't got anyone coming on afterwards, have we?
No, that's probably what we need. I need to.
I think that's
get
the
a
thing.
queue.
So it had to be
Get a
kept.
queue,
It
yeah.
obviously had to be kept to an hour, and it kind of really wasn't long enough. I think could have gone on for about another hour at least, and I think the people in the audience would have been quite happy with that. I think it was very, very well received, and there are quite a few people that have said afterwards that they thought it was the best. It was sort of best session of the
I've heard that too.
conference.
Well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so we were really only able to talk about the kind of the sort of successes, the positive aspect of direct action and pressure campaigning, because I obviously spoke about the ALF, and Mel spoke about that type of action as well. And kind of, like Amanda was involved in the Speak campaign too, and she was also involved in the campaign against greyhound racing, which Louise and I were very involved in as well, although that wasn't talked about. And then Tom was involved in the Shack campaign, and he's written a book, hasn't it? Your neighbor kills puppies, which has just been published, all about the Shack campaign, and very, very goes into great detail about the campaign. There's lots of information.
Yeah, I think he's doing a signing in Liverpool, so that must be.
Yeah, he's done a series of signings in different parts of the country.
So that must be tying in with the World Day for Laboratory Animals. I suppose.
It may well be. I went to the one that he did at Camp Beagle a few weeks ago. He did a signing there.
Right. Okay.
So, and obviously he was talking about the Shack campaign. So it was, and obviously there were campaigns before that. For instance, the Consort Beagles, Beagle Breeders, and Hillgrove Farm bred cats for experiments, and there were campaigns against those places, and they closed. And then the campaign went on to tackle hunting and life sciences, and became Shack.
I had to go to the doctor last week about Hillgrove. Would you believe? Because my cheek was smashed in.
Oh yes, when you got attacked by the police there.
Yeah, so I've had this thing where I've been trying to get the doctors to take seriously that I didn't have this at all until that injury, and ever since then, for the last 30 odd years, it's been a problem. But so I've got these kind of like things where you can kind of rinse your nose and all this. All like very unpleasant kind of stuff. But it's kind of like a really ongoing thing that this injury has kind of lasted from Hillgrove till now, really.
I know. I wonder if you could have sued the police for that.
Well, I did. I got 4,000 quid.
Oh, you did? Oh, good. At least
Yeah.
you got something out of them for it.
Yeah, but it was one of those things where
Yeah.
they didn't admit liability. You know, one of those things.
Yeah.
And because we subpoenaed even their helicopter footage, right? And there was a bit where just as I got injured, they panned away, and so you couldn't see it. It was like a second or so out.
Frustrating.
It was really frustrating. You know,
At least
anyway.
you got something out of them, though. That's one thing, isn't it?
Yes.
Probably doesn't make up for the aggro that it scores you, though. I wouldn't have thought over the years.
So before you get onto this thing about only half of the story, Deb's asking, did you come to any conclusions about how we are progressing?
No, not kind of not really, not to any great degree, because we never reached that bit. It was all about the kind of successes and how great it was, and then there were just time for a few questions, and then that was the end of it. There was no time.
Needed 2 hours, really, didn't you, for that? Really?
Yeah, you really did, and so it's part of the reason why for the show tonight is to discuss that second part, for me to talk about kind of what wasn't said. I mean, obviously it's only me on here saying it, but obviously there's quite a few things I would have said about what we can learn from what happened in the past and what we need to learn from what happened. Well, one general agreement between everyone, though, and I think it would enable the movement to progress, is that we need a lot more grassroots activism, and we need a lot more autonomous actions, really, which was in a sense a feature of the past. Back in the day, we had a lot of local animal rights groups, didn't we? And almost every town in the country had an animal rights group, didn't it, at one time? And that's and those people were active in various ways, and we've kind of lost that. And I think everyone felt that we needed this, more grassroots activism in the movement, and that would be, Well,
I guess the question there is, because what I remember is you had local, regional, and national, and so that it was that kind of structure, wasn't it? You had the local groups doing the stuff all the time, regional groups kind of coordinating, and then we'd all get together for national things like marches and stuff.
Yes, yeah, and there was stuff like the Animal Rights Coalition, which which kind of drew a lot of these groups together, and there were regional meetings of that, and there were also national meetings, weren't there, in the Animal Rights Coalition as well. Because
you think the internet has damaged all that, Ronnie?
Well, it was interesting because Mel said that he thinks in general that the internet and particularly social media, when you take everything into account, has had a negative effect on the movement.
In what way?
In the sense that people are kind of spending time on social media. It's kind of like pseudo activism. They think that they can be posting things on social media, commenting on social media, and that, in a sense, is taking the place of kind of outside activism in the real world. And I tend to kind of, I think that I think that's true. I think social media is a double-edged sword. I think there's some ways in which it's kind of helped activism and helped spread the message, but there's other ways in which it's hindered it. I think it's kind of, and how it weighs up, whether when you kind of balance it all up, whether it's a positive or a negative, I'm not really sure. But Mel certainly thought it's a negative. It's been a negative influence. And when you think back in the day, before social media, we were able to organise. We were able to organise activism, locally, regionally, and nationally. We've got sort of a World Day for Laboratory Animals coming up. Well, that's actually today, isn't it? Is it 24th today? Tomorrow. It's tomorrow. Yeah. That's the 20th, which actually the reason it is it's the birthday of Lord Dowding, who was a big anti-vivisection campaigner, and that's why World Day was set on the 24th.
I never knew that, actually.
That's the 24th of April. It's Lord Dowding's birthday. And the World Day for Animals in Laboratories March is held on the nearest Saturday to that. So that's why that's taking place this coming Saturday in Liverpool, and there will only be a few hundred people there on that march. I think that's pretty much guaranteed. And those marches in recent years, probably if they got more than 500 people, they were kind of lucky. Whereas back in the day, if you go back to the 1980s, the World Day for Animals in Laboratories marches attracted 10,000, even 20,000 people. So this is the kind of difference, and that was way before the
I think the Porton Down one was about 12,000. I remember.
Yeah,
that
yeah, huge marches, and and all that's become very much diminished, and so there's obviously.
Do you think that's something to do with? I bet Mel Broughton would have made this point. That's something to do with veganism, because you can guarantee that a lot of that 12,000 would not have been vegans.
No, but I think it's no, they wouldn't. Although at the time that kind of was going on, like the anti-vivisection organisations, certainly people involved in running those organisations were pretty much all vegan by that time. I mean, that doesn't mean that membership was.
No.
But what they did was, you see, they encouraged the membership to be active. Back in the day, back in the 1980s, these events were organised by the National Anti-Vivisection Organisation. I think the British Union for the Abolition of Vivisection and the National Anti-Vivisection Society took turns to organise it. And of course, they encouraged all their members to go, and these organisations had thousands of members. You see, so that's what happened in their newsletters, in their communications. They encouraged their members to take part in these marches, and a lot of them came along. And I think that's one of the reasons why.
Yeah, what I'm getting at though is that a lot of people would have been on those marches, and they'd be there as anti-vivisectionists.
Yes.
Now, there's I don't know whether there are any anti-vivisectionists per se anymore who will say not vegan, because you know what I mean.
I no, and not long term. I think what happens is you get people that become anti-vivisectionists. In fact, you see, for instance, if you take Camp Beagle, for instance, that a lot of people have been attracted to that campaign against MBR Acres, a beagle breeding facility. For people who don't know, it's a facility that breeds beagles for laboratories in Cambridgeshire here in England. And there's a lot of people that have been attracted to that campaign because they're horrified that, beagles are being bred for experiments, and so they come along, got involved in that campaign. And those people aren't vegan or weren't vegan, but a lot of them, because they rubbed shoulders with vegans who are already involved in that campaign, they've become vegan. And that's kind of how that's happened. But I mean, back in the day, I mean, when you go back to like the sort of pre-1970s, there was a variety of national organisations campaigning against different issues, against animal experiments, against the fur trade, against factory farming as well, against zoos and circuses, and hardly anyone involved in those organisations was vegan. In fact, mostly they weren't even vegetarian. And it was only kind of sort of during and after the 1970s that changed, that these organisations kind of became, I suppose, radicalised in a sense. And you got a lot of vegans. They've kind of taken over by vegans, really. So that most of the people, as I said, most of the people that were involved in running those groups were vegan. Yeah.
So what I'm hearing from you, confirm yay or nay, is that we might have a smaller movement now, but it's made up of vegans. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I'm saying that yes. I mean, there's certainly a lot more vegans around now than there were in the 1970s. I think the difference between then and now is that if someone was a vegan, back in the 70s or 80s, there'd also be a high probability that they would be an activist. And I think there were kind of two reasons for that. I mean, first of all, a lot of people became activists before they became vegans. People became involved in the hunt saboteurs, or they became involved in the anti-vivisection movement, and they rubbed shoulders with vegans who were already in those movements, and then they became vegan. And so that's kind of, that's how it happened then. And I think also because it was so much harder in those days to kind of live as a vegan. It was much more difficult to operate in normal society as a vegan, back then. And so you had to have a certain toughness about you to become a vegan. And I think that same toughness also led people to become activists, because they had that kind of strength or whatever, that kind of they didn't shy away from activism because they had that toughness. And I think that's the difference now.
It's interesting that you put it that way. And also in terms of, you talked about radicalism and everything, because Colleen is saying that this is going back to the social media thing. Certainly the social media had a negative influence in terms of de-radicalizing and moderating the message. And so there's like an evolution and a process going on, because I'd agree with this. I mean, the modern day movement sounds weaker now than it's ever had done in my experience. When you would turn up and all the banners were animals have rights and liberate and all that kind of stuff.
Oh yes,
devastate to liberate or whatever, all that kind of stuff. There wasn't all the kind of cruelty, mercy, abuse stuff that there is now. So our movement now seems to me to resemble, in terms of what we say, to resemble the RSPCA more than ever before. And I think that's why some vegans are a bit confused about that. So, I mean, would you say that Colleen is right, that because in some ways now, you don't demonstrate your commitment by going to events. You can just be online and say what you want, I suppose.
Yeah, I think that's what happened. I think it kind of, if somebody was kind of angry about what happened to other animals, then the only way of doing something about that was to get out and go on a demonstration or take part in an event. Now people are able to put stuff online and kind of diffuse that, that feeling, even though when you really look at it, a lot of stuff that gets put online probably isn't all that effective.
Yeah, but there's also another thing, isn't there? Like we did that 50 things, and I did that joke about, because one of the outreach suggestions was going to the butcher and remember that and saying thank you very much and all that. Yeah.
To explain to people that didn't see that show, we were looking at there was some organization that put out, there was a document containing 50 different ways of doing vegan outreach, and we went through it, giving our views on it. I think it took about 5 shows, didn't it? 10 each show. Yeah. And one of them wasn't it, sticking a sticker on a butcher's window saying, "We love you" or something, wasn't it?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, but please change. Yeah, we love you, but please change.
We love you, but please stop selling meat.
Going back to what you just said, a lot of people would turn up at the meetings, and they turn up at the kind of national events and everything. But in the meantime, they'd probably be smashing those butcher's shop windows and the local fur shop and everything. So that's how the kind of initial anger got expressed. Whereas now you put out a social media post.
Yes, I think that's what's happened. I think it's kind of, it's allowed people to express how they feel in a different way. And I think the problem is that way often isn't all that. People think it's effective, but I doubt very often. I think social media can be used effectively to, to spread the message. But I think that has to be done in a certain way. And I think so often people don't do it in that way, but yet they feel they are doing something when they're not really.
Right, just dropped my pencil. Yeah. I think there's something in that. That kind of everything's online, and so you don't have the community part of it, possibly, anymore. But one question I wanted to ask you in general terms about your panel is whether there's always a danger, and I feel this myself all the time, that people of our generation might be looking back at things with rose-tinted glasses, type of thing, and maybe wasn't as good as we remember and all that malarkey. So that must have come up in the panel, yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a danger of that, but I nevertheless think that there are some concrete successes that arose from the activism of the past. And I mean, for instance, I spoke about the ALF and about really in the UK and about the major successes really of the Animal Liberation Front, where we saw this huge decline in the number of animal experiments, between 76 and 86, a huge decline in the number of animal experiments, with no other reason for that apart from the pressure that the ALF put on the vivisection industry. And then there was the huge decline in the fur trade as well, which kind of started a bit later. The actions of the big actions against the fur industry that took place, I suppose, particularly during the 80s and into the 90s, that led to a huge decline in the retail fur trade, where you had all these department stores closing their fur departments and the high street fur shops disappearing massively. And I think largely due to ALF action as well. So there was there were those kind of big successes that I'd attribute to the ALF, and obviously I spoke about that. And Mel was talking about that type of action as well. So was Manda. Tom was more about the Shack campaign, and about the successes that predated the Shack campaign in terms of the same people. But they brought about the closure of
the regal rabbits and the consort.
Yeah, it was consort beagles, and I think that was in Herefordshire, and of course the cat breeding place, Hillgrove in Oxfordshire as well, closed after their pressure campaigns mounted against them, and then the big one against Huntingdon Life Sciences, which actually didn't result in that place closing, but I suppose it could be argued that it was successful in other ways. We don't know. We know from the ALF campaign that pressure on the vivisection industry led to a huge reduction in animal experiments, and to what extent the pressure from the Shack campaign did the same. I mean, obviously not such a big extent, but I think it's quite likely that did cause some reduction in animal experiments, even though it didn't succeed in closing Huntingdon Life Sciences.
Do you think on that then, Ronnie, that I've often felt this, that maybe it went from consort to regal rabbits and this kind of stuff, and then it went to Hillgrove, and then Shack, and that was a big jump up in terms of size and everything, and in terms of state support and everything.
Yes.
Maybe the movement kind of bit off more than it could chew at that stage. Do you think that could be true?
Well, I suppose that could be said, but for a long time it looked like the Shack campaign was going to be successful. All the different companies supplying different, providing Huntingdon Life Sciences, with different materials. I think even the company that supplied their toilet rolls refused to do so in the end, and nobody would give them banking facilities even. All these, it was like cutting off their life support systems. Everything they needed to function was being cut off by pressure being put on these companies that supplied them with all these various things. And for a long, long time, it was highly successful, and it did look like that. Yeah, the place was going to close, but then, of course, what happened was the state stepped in, and I think this was what kind of needed to be discussed and dealt with by the panel, and it wasn't because of lack of time. You see, both those campaigns, like the ALF and SHAC, both hit the buffers of the state because they were successful for a long time, and then the state stepped in and crushed those campaigns. I mean, the ALF hasn't been totally crushed. There's still ALF actions going on, but it's very much diminished from what it was back in the day. And a lot of that is to do with actions of the state in various ways. And of course, the SHAC campaign was crushed by the state. The state gave support to Huntington Life Sciences. They supplied them with banking facilities through the Bank of England, which was totally unprecedented. This hadn't been ever done before.
That's what I mean about taking on such a big.
But at some stage, it would have needed to be stepped up, wouldn't it? At some stage, it would have been seen as a threat that the state felt it had to deal with. Because even if you're closing, the idea was, we'll close one animal, one place after another. That's
take the bricks from the wall.
Take the bricks, but you see, of course, in the end, you're going to get the vivisection industry.
Moaning to the government,
government, saying, "Look,
Perry is saying bring it back." But do you think it could come back, even a modified SHAC?
Well, I think the problem is, I think the problem is you'd be faced with the same problem again. You're faced with the same problem again. I think there's another difficulty. There's a difficulty in terms of getting the number of activists that you'd need to run campaigns similar to SHAC again, because there's been a decline in activists across the board, really, and that's something else that we kind of needed to talk about, why that was and what can be done about it, for instance. So that would be a difficulty for SHAC. But you see, the thing is that the same thing would happen again because there's been no change in the state. You see, the problem is if you've got a government that's highly speciesist in its outlook, it's human supremacist, they're going to act against the animal liberation movement. The animal liberation movement gets to a point where it's putting these businesses under threat. It's putting the vivisection industry under threat. Even if it was like putting animal farming under threat, because that's another big business that the government supports, then the government is going to take action to crush those campaigns. If we have, and the government we got now, I mean it was the Tony Blair government, the Labour governments that that oversaw a lot of the the crushing of the SHAC campaign, for instance, and now we've got a government in power at the moment that's far to the right of that government, even though that Tony Blair government, in my view, was a right-wing government, but they weren't left-wing. We've got a government that's probably the most right-wing government, pro-business, neoliberal government ever we've had in this country now. So in my view, they've been even worse. And if you look at what's happened with the environmental campaigns, the direct actions taken by groups like Extinction Rebellion, Just Stop Oil, for instance, what's been the response of this government to those campaigns? Has it been to accede to their demands? Has it been to say, right, okay, we're going to do something meaningful about the climate crisis? No, it hasn't. The response has been to crack down on protests, to bring in more draconian measures against protesters. That's been the response of this government. And we kind of can't ignore that. We can't ignore that. Otherwise, I mean, we did a show a while back about, remember Beagle Dogs and Groundhogs, about how, the anti-vivisection movement, there's been a revival in the anti-vivisection movement just in kind of recent years. here in the UK. It started with Camp Beagle, and it's raised awareness of animal experiments. A lot of members of the public thought that animal experimentation no longer existed because everything had gone so quiet, and so there's been a revival of anti-vivisection campaigning, and the public have become more aware. And I think on the basis of that, we did that show, didn't we, about the anti-vivisection movement's got to be very careful about not repeating the mistakes of the past, because the same thing will happen as soon as it starts getting effective. It'll be crushed by the state. And so we kind of have to, we sort of have to bear that in mind when thinking about, what we need to do really as a movement as a whole to move forward. No.
And is that what you're getting at with only half of the story then? Yes,
that's right. Because the successes of these campaigns were kind of lauded and very, very enthusiastically received by the audience, and particularly the ALF, this was like a huge success. You can reduce the number of experiments on animals every year by 3 million and virtually destroy the retail fur trade. Then those are things that kind of people are going to be very pleased to hear about that. But the kind of limitations of those campaigns weren't discussed, because neither of them did what their name said. The Animal Liberation Front didn't bring about animal liberation. It spared many, many millions of animals from suffering slaughter. Didn't bring about animal liberation in terms of a widespread situation where other animals are no longer oppressed and exploited by humans. It didn't get anywhere near bringing that about. I mean, when we consider that every second of every day 50,000 animals are killed just to feed the human the human world population, and in the UK it's 250 a second, I think it is in the UK, 250 a second, and that is just the food industry. When you look at other areas, to me, the major area in which animals are oppressed or exploited is by the food industry, is for food. Secondly, it's adverse impact on the environment by humans that harms other animals. I mean, a climate crisis is a huge example of that, where we had, I mean, the fires in New Zealand attributed to the climate crisis are reported to have killed, no, not in New Zealand, in Australia a couple of years ago. There was 2 billion animals, 2 billion free living animals.
I think there's one in several places. I mean, in the
and that's only one instance.
Yeah, we covered the fires in Greece.
Yeah, it's just horrendous, and a lot of that's actually attributed to animal agriculture. I mean, for instance, there's a paper being published, I think 2019, by an organisation called Climate Healers. It comes to the conclusion that animal agriculture is 87% responsible for the climate crisis. It's hugely responsible. There's a downplaying of how responsible animal farming, and to a certain extent the fishing industry as well, are for global heating, for the climate crisis. So you've got that as well. You've got these two huge areas of the oppression of other animals. Then animal experiments comes third. You're probably talking about, there's been various estimates, but it's probably talking about 200 million animals worldwide perish because of animal experimentation. So that's the third biggest area.
Well, look, Ronnie, I want to keep you on your kind of thread about half of the story, but and you told me that I think you were the only panel member that mentioned veganism.
Yes.
So were the others actually advocating for a return to that kind of thing?
Well, there kind of wasn't. There wasn't really the time to talk too much about what do we do now. I mean, Tom is a big, obviously a big a big supporter of pressure campaigns, and he did a talk. He did a talk immediately following the panel about how to organise a pressure campaign, which I unfortunately wasn't able to stay and listen to because Mel and I had there was a kind of film crew from Spain who wanted to talk to Mel and myself about they're doing a film about vivisection, and so they wanted to interview us. So I wasn't able to go to any of the talks after the one we took part in. But we didn't really in our discussion on our panel. We kind of it was really all about the past and the kind of glory of the past, without talking very much at all about where do we go from here. And that was the problem. We needed another hour to talk about where do we go from here, because it talked about the perspectives of long-term activists. Was the title of the title of the panel, but it kind of was only about the past. It wasn't about our perspectives in terms.
It should have been called "That Was Then, This Is Now," I suppose.
Yeah, but there wasn't any. There was very, very little about now. The only thing really that kind of came out of it was like, we need more grassroots activity. We need more local animal rights groups. We need more people to act on their own initiative. We need more. We need more autonomy. And of course, a huge lesson. The huge lesson really to be learned, from the Animal Liberation Front, even though it would be very, very difficult, well, impossible, I think, really, to kind of revive the Animal Liberation Front now, certainly as it was then in the past. In the UK, probably throughout the world, it'd be difficult because how things have changed, because how this, because the actions of the state, and how it's more difficult to kind of do these things now, and really, especially here in the UK, to do that type of action and actually get away with it now because of surveillance, for instance. But the big lesson to be learnt from why the ALF was so successful for so long, I think a huge factor in that was autonomy. A huge factor in that was there was no central control, that people were free to organise and carry out their own actions as long as they kept to a few simple principles. They were free to carry out and organise. People didn't have to wait round for some big global or national organisation to tell them what to do. People acted on their own initiative, carried out their own actions, and that kind of meant two things. First of all, it meant a lot more actions took place, and secondly, it meant that it was much more difficult. Although, of course, in the end, we could say that the state did pretty much crush the Animal Liberation Front. The reason why it kind of took them so long to do it, and the ALF was able to achieve so much in the meantime, was because there was no leadership. It was no pyramid structure. There was no one at the top giving orders that other people were waiting to obey.
No, not according to the Sheffield trial. You were the general.
Well, yes, I mean they tried to, because these are hierarchical organisations, the police and the judiciary as well. So of course, the police tried to give us ranks, and they unfortunately gave me
that was the only way they could understand it, wasn't it?
The only way they could understand it. You see, and of course, I was a big general that was meant to be organising all these things and all that, and I got given a 10-year sentence because I get put in jail. Everything carries on. It didn't stop it. It didn't really stop it. It might have stopped it. It did stop a few things because some good activists were put in prison as well. But it didn't really stop very much. Things carried on. The LFP, was kind of highly active for another 10 years after that. Because I wasn't the general. I wasn't the person giving orders. Nobody was giving the orders. People were acting on their own initiative, and we've lost that. We've lost that as a movement. What we have now is these kind of global organisations that kind of whereby people are sort of waiting for instructions on kind of what to do almost. All right, yeah, some of them do facilitate, and kind of do sort of help people in different areas, carry out actions. But I mean, I'm kind of particularly probably thinking about, I suppose, vegan outreach and how that happens now. and you've got organisations like AV, for instance, where it's not. None of these groups are autonomous. That they're kind of chapters. Chapter now is the word that you use, which is kind of totally alien to me. It's come from the USA or something, hasn't it? That you have these that are kind of, and they're not truly autonomous. That it's like a kind of franchise. And I'm not saying I think they're a bad thing. I think they've kind of have succeeded in educating a lot of people to become vegan, but it's not autonomous. It's not like you've got these local groups that aren't. I mean, we used to have, back in the day, we'd have local animal rights groups, and we weren't like connected to any national organization. We might use their materials, but we were, the animal rights group for that area, and we were independent, we were autonomous, and somebody just decided, I'm going to set up an animal rights group in my local area, and I'm going to just do it, and that was it. Now, and you don't get that now. Everyone's waiting around for instructions from on high, and I think that's limiting the amount of action we do.
I'd agree with that. There's still there's an AV group still in Dublin, but I think it only goes out about once every 3 months. But when it does put up a post, wanting people to volunteer, there's a huge list of rules.
This is alien. I find all that really alien. That's not where, that's not kind of where I'm from, and that wasn't how it was back in the day. And I think it kind of strangles. I think it can strangle,
Well, it feeds into what Colleen said, which is it de-radicalizes, doesn't it? It moderates because you've ended up with leaders and followers and stuff.
I think we have to encourage people to become autonomous, and I think that you kind of, going back to, kind of going back to this problem we have with the state, that the state will crush. It doesn't crush all campaigns. It doesn't crush all kind of campaigns that that are kind of trying to shut down various forms of the oppression of other animals. I mean, for instance, I was involved in a campaign for 13 years against the dog racing industry. Well, the state didn't move in on us. We were instrumental in closing a lot of these dog tracks and preventing a lot of, proposed ones from opening. Now, the state didn't actually, move in and say, right, we've got to kind of bring in this new legislation against these people campaigning against dog racing, and we're going to set up a special squad to hunt them down. They didn't do any of that because that industry wasn't powerful enough to put enough pressure on the state to make the state do that. I mean, in where you are in Ireland, it's a bit different because the Irish state supports the dog racing industry. So it's much harder. Yeah, so it's much harder for campaigners there to actually how we kind of were instrumental in closing the tracks is just having, and this is where local animal rights groups were really useful to that campaign, because what they would do is where they had a dog track in their area, they would they would actually every Saturday would have people outside giving out leaflets to the racegoers, telling them about what happened to the dogs and trying to persuade them not to go in or not to go again. And that had a big effect in cutting down attendances, and that kind of, with a lot of the tracks who already weren't doing very well financially for other reasons, it pushed them over, was a...
Well, we've got a show, haven't we? What, the sinking of the Stowe? We've got that show.
Yeah, the one about the Walthamstow. I mean, Walthamstow Stadium, which was the kind of the flagship of the,
So you would say that the Greyhound thing was a pressure campaign, wouldn't you?
No, it had element. No, it was an educational campaign. It was an educational campaign. It was based on educating people who went to the races.
So what's the defining feature of pressure campaign for you then, Ronnie?
Well, I mean, if you look at things that are termed pressure campaigns, like Shack, Shack was aimed at putting pressure on, the suppliers of HLS, the people that supplied HLS with various things that HLS needed to operate, put pressure on those companies so that those companies said, well, it's not worth the aggro for us to carry on supplying HLS. It's not worth the aggro, so we're not going to do it anymore.
Yeah, so it's like it's more like a kind of direct pressure of the individual kind of arms. Because personally, I think you could almost argue that vegan education is a pressure campaign against cultural speciesism, but it's completely different from what you're talking about.
Yeah, and there are elements of what I would call pressure in our campaign. For instance, we used to do a yearly protest outside the award ceremony for the dog racing industry, and sometimes there were these regional award ceremonies where so that was more or less putting pressure on the dog racing people, making their life uncomfortable.
Yeah, well, in Dublin though, there used to so some of the coach companies used to include greyhound racing as part of the thing, and there was pressure put on that.
Yeah, so, you see, that would be now we never did that. I mean, we never did that, and that would have been pressure if you'd said, well, look, we're going to demonstrate outside your coach company so that you stop, and they think, well, it's only a small part of our business taking people to dog racing. It's not worth the aggro, so we're not going to do it anymore. And that would have been, that would have been pressure. But we didn't. As was education, we were like really educating people about what happened to dogs so that they wouldn't go anymore. And that was so said. It was like we were there were elements of pressure really, but it was mainly an educational campaign, I would say.
Yeah, so that would be the distinction. What I want to try and do is bring a couple of threads together in the sense that we're assuming that Tom in particular, Mel, and that would probably argue for a modified return to that kind of thing. I wonder whether Debbie's position here about the media. You see, that was an interesting one, and we've spoken about this before, because in a sense the media was very useful at first and then was a big problem because of the change in the ALF, right? So do you think the mainstream media or the mass media could be, as it were, handled differently, and that would actually help?
Well, I think they're interested. The media are interested in spectacular stuff, aren't they? They're not going to cover someone handing out leaflets in the street, and of course the ALF actions were spectacular, and actions by other direct action groups like the Animal Liberation Leagues, and they were mentioned as well. Mel talked quite a lot about them. These actions got publicity because they were spectacular, weren't they? But where there's been media attention now is where there have been kind of spectacular actions taking place. I mean, like Animal Rebellion, for instance, stroke Animal Rising have had a lot of media attention because they've carried out spectacular actions, for instance. But it has to be, you've got to do something like that. You're not going to get it just for a stall in the street. And because there haven't been so many spectacular actions in recent years, I think that's why we haven't had the media coverage.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true. And also, I mean, to kind of directly kind of address Deb's point here is that they were kind of more interested because of the newsworthiness, if it bleeds, it leads, and all this kind of stuff. Whereas now you're having to rely on more things which are a bit more like publicity stunts and everything.
Yeah, I think you still can. I think you still can do, and this is a kind of, something I kind of wanted to come on to, because I think kind of first of all going back to the problem where you're having campaigns against these powerful industries, that the state has a kind of a vested interest in supporting, because there are people involved in those industries that that big corporations, very powerful businesses, and of course members of the government are involved in these things as well. And so if you can't tackle the big ones, you tackle the big ones like animal experimentation, like animal farming, and say the fossil fuel industry, for instance. Then which I say is also an animal liberation issue, because, you know, huge contribution to the climate crisis and pollution and other environmental destruction, and the main victims of that are other animals, of course. So you got these, when you tackle things like that, the state is going to defend those industries, and the state is going to move to crush your campaigns. And we've seen that with the environmental movement, and with these new laws being brought in, for instance. You know, we saw it with the ALF, we saw it with SHAC. And so, of course, you know, we kind of can't ignore that. We have to do something about the state, and we have to do something about the nature of the state. Otherwise, this is going to happen forever. And I think that this is why we need to start thinking about things at a more fundamental level: is how do we actually change the nature of the state? You know, how do we create an administration that's much more sympathetic to what we want, that either won't stand in the way of those campaigns, or actually do things themselves to bring that change? Because if you look at kind of, you know, the big gains for animal liberation, you know, that have occurred over the years, these gains have been achieved by direct action in terms of what the ALF achieved, and they've been achieved by education in terms of, like, we've had this, you know, really big increase in the number of vegans, and that's really down to education, isn't it? Vegan education in one way or another. These big gains that we've had, and you know, I say big gains, I mean they're relatively small when compared with the edifice of animal oppression, but you know, these gains that we've made have been achieved by direct action and education. How much have we had from legislation? I mean, talk about the UK here, but it's probably the same all over. When you look, what legislation have we had here? There's been a ban on fur farming. All right, fur is still allowed to be imported and still allowed to be sold. All right, so these fur farms and the fur industry in other countries is still being supported. And
the fur farmers are multimillionaires now.
Yeah, exactly. They've been given compensation, and they're multimillionaires, and many of them will be investing that money in other forms of the oppression of other animals, because that's the type of people they are. We've had the so-called ban on fox hunting, which, you know, is very weak form of legislation. They've still been able to, you know, get round it and go out hunting, and it's not enforced, because there's no political will from this government to enforce it. What else have we had?
Well, you always said that the best thing about the bans was the stopping of the hare coursing.
Yeah, the hare coursing. Yeah, the organised hare coursing was the only thing that, you know, like we used to go.
Although, to be quite honest, we don't actually know if there's any of that going on that we don't know about.
They're not going to do the big hare coursing event where loads of people gathered and there was betting and all that. They can't do those because they're too obvious. I mean, the rough coursing is always going on, where guys go in a field with greyhounds and lurchers and go after, you know, hares or whatever. That's always gone on, and that's still.
I mean, what about these big estates by people like Guy Ritchie and?
Well, I think it would still be very, very difficult to organise a huge hare coursing event that used to be held, like the Waterloo Cup, or what the various regional coursing clubs used to. They're too big and too obvious. You see, too big and too obvious. So they can't operate. But then a lot of the people that were involved in those things now go to Ireland, because, of course, coursing is legal in Ireland, and a lot of them go to Ireland to. So how much effect all that's had, I don't know. But it's the one what you might call, you know, activity, so-called blood sport, that has been severely affected by the hunting ban. But it hasn't really, you know, in terms of fox hunting and stag hunting, other forms of hunting, it kind of hasn't been that effective. And so we've had tiny crumbs from the table, haven't we, in terms of what we've got from the state. You know, we've achieved far more by direct action and education than ever.
We shouldn't expect anything from the state, should we?
No, we shouldn't. We can't expect anything from the state, because they're speciesists, aren't they? It's a speciesist, assuming supremacist administration. Until we change that,
so it's always the same. It comes back to the fact that we've got to change the culture.
You've got to change. Yeah, exactly. See,
Incidentally, though, the good thing about that is that vegan education, which would change the culture, that's the thing that the state are not going to close down like they did.
Yeah, exactly.
with Shaq.
This is the thing that how do you radically change the nature of the administration so that the administration becomes sympathetic to animal liberation? Because unless we do that, we're never going to get very far. And all these campaigns, once they start, against the, these big industries, once they start, getting anywhere near success, they're going to be crushed. You see, so we have
but Ronnie, come on, let's be real here, right? We obviously it needs people power, so it needs the grassroots.
Yes,
we know all around the world now, the globe, people are voting for the most horrendous.
Yes, you see, this is the thing that it's all down to ordinary people, because the horrendous government we've got in power at the moment, and like we've had horrendous governments forever. This one is just particularly horrendous, but like the previous Labour administration, they were horrendous as well. Like kind of that kind of reneged on their on even the kind of mildest of promises they made, or most of them in terms of animal protection, for instance. How do we check? People voted those. First of all, those politicians that stood for Parliament, they come from the public. They haven't come out of a spaceship, and teleported down to Earth or anything like that. They've arisen out of the ordinary public, really, one way or another. First of all, and secondly, those politicians have been voted in by ordinary members of the public. They've been elected to Parliament. This is, we've got the government in this country we've got now because about 29% of the people eligible to vote voted for them. That's why they're in power by really quite a large majority, which I think we're going to have a change of government almost certainly in, I think, November when we have the general election. But I kind of don't really, and I think we'll have a Labour government. I don't expect.
I think you might have to change in commas.
Well, it's tiny. It's like lesser of two evils, isn't it? Really, and that's all you're going to get at the moment. So you've got to change ordinary people. You've got to change ordinary people as individuals, the attitudes of ordinary people as individuals, because it's those ordinary people, right? They're from where the politicians come, right? Okay, all right. We know the Tory politicians aren't ordinary people. They come from Eton, don't they, in the public schools? But like, if you're going to get any decent politician, they're going to come from ordinary people, right? And then you need the ordinary people to vote those people into power, right? So we have to educate ordinary people, have to change the mindset of a substantial number of ordinary people if ever we're going to get, for two reasons. First of all, to do with people's behaviour as consumers, because people are consumers and people are voters, right? And if we could get a load of people to no longer consume animal products, like for every person here in the UK who consumes animal products, almost 100 animals are slaughtered every year, right? So by educating far more people to, well, preferably become vegan philosophically, but at least if you educated them not to consume animal products, that would make a huge difference just in terms of people, how people behave as consumers. But then if you change people's, attitudes and their kind of political viewpoint, particularly in terms of other animals, then you're going to get out of those people. If we educate more people to become vegan, then some of those people will want to become politicians. And so you'll have more vegan politicians, and you'll also have a hell of a lot more vegans to vote for those politicians. See? So in order to change, to change the politics, to change the nature of the administration, so we can really, end these huge areas of the oppression of other animals, right? To do that, you have to change the politics. To change the politics, you have to change the culture. And to change the culture, you have to change people as individuals. And you do that through vegan outreach. And this is why, the vegan outreach is, the success of these campaigns, it's success of of pressure campaigns, for instance, really depends on vegan outreach. It really depends on vegan outreach, of there being a lot more vegan outreach. So
Yeah,
these
but
campaigns
it's
don't
not.
end up being destroyed.
The problem is with this, Ronnie, is that in itself is not enough. You know, in the sense that we're back to what Colleen said about de-radicalization and everything. Because what passes as vegan outreach now, I put a post out the other day saying that the vegan movement is the softest shite at the moment, and I was meaning that it's de-radicalized. It's so moderate. The message is so moderate. It's RSPCA based, as I said. You've got people like Earthling Ed, who veganism for Earthling Ed is too radical for Earthling Ed. And so he said time and time again that what he does is redefine it to mean the reduction of animal suffering, the same as their SPCA. So you've got all this. Leonard has been out for 15 years, supported by Mel Joy, right? And that is it's all right to include products derived from our fellow animals in your diet and this kind of stuff. Now we've got this kind of moderate version, and that doesn't do anything in terms of radicalizing. And and you also says, well, if they're not going to be philosophical vegans, well, maybe just plant-based might be enough in terms of consumerism. But I'm not sure about that, because if you want the kind of change that you want, you need vegans who see veganism as part of the peace movement, the anti-war movement, who see it as a big radical change in society.
Yeah,
we're not getting that. We're just getting don't be cruel now.
I think we're scared to say that the emperor has no clothes. Fundamentally,
what does that mean?
Well, we're scared to say things as they are, and what I'm saying is fundamentally, there seems to be this kind of timidness and almost cowardice to actually, say things as they are, to say what is, and what the situation is that we we have one species on the earth that's the tyrant over all the others, supremacist, imperialist, the human species. Your
human Reich, as you used to say.
The human Reich, yeah. That's the situation. And there's no reason, there's no rational or moral reason for humans to consider themselves superior to other sentient animals. And we need to be trumpeting that from the rooftops. We need to that is the true situation on Earth, right? That we have a tyrant species, we have a supremacist species that is totally a total oppressor and wrongful oppressor.
We've got a very violent species.
Yeah, we have to. People seem to. Everyone's looking for other ways around it. Otherwise, people are looking. How can we find a form of words to create change? But that's actually saying things as they are, right? That it is fundamentally wrong for humans to oppress and exploit other animals. It is a moral wrong. We wouldn't shilly-shally about the way, our movement does to a large extent, if it was to do with, the oppression of people of color, or the oppression of women, or the oppression of people because of their sexuality.
Well, you're opening up a complete.
Those things are said as they are.
But I mean, we've got the movement now, which is deliberately separating itself from the radicalism of anti-racism and all that kind of stuff, right? Because of all this anti-intersectional stuff that's going on. I mean, we've got a vegan movement which you would have described as intersectional if you had to describe its origins. But now it's moderated and moderated and moderated until we're almost like frightened of our own history now.
Well, we need to be speaking about the oppression of other animals in the same way that we, you know, and our opposition to that in the same way that we'd be speaking about our opposition to the oppression, you know, of people of color, or to the oppression of women, or to the oppression of gay people.
But we don't, Ronnie. We say, you know, we've got nothing to do with those radical movements. And by the way, don't be cruel. That's.
But we wouldn't say, well, you know, we wouldn't speak. You know, we wouldn't speak about. You know, we wouldn't be saying, oh, you know, like, you know, this thing about animal lovers and all that. That's kind of said a lot. We wouldn't use that term, that sort of language, if we're speaking about the oppression of one group of humans by another group of humans. But that, you know, you'd be talking about justice, wouldn't you? You'd be talking about rights. You'd be talking about exploitation. You'd be talking about oppression. You'd be using that kind of language, wouldn't you? And we kind of denigrate. We denigrate our cause, so to speak, by not using that same language in terms of other animals and in terms of, you know, what humans do to other animals. And we need to be, it's like, rather than kind of like hiding away from it, we need to be trumpeting it. We need to be saying all the time, you know, humans are not more important than other animals. There's no reason, either rationally or morally, to hold that view. And we need to be saying that everywhere. You know, we need to be saying it as it is. You know, that's why I'm saying the species emperor has no clothes. Everyone, you know, like the story of the emperor has no clothes. Everyone was frightened to say that the emperor had no clothes, and they pretended that wasn't the case. And that's
you think the modern day vegan movement doesn't say that we have.
Well,
no right?
I think that there are there's a big part of it that doesn't really say that. A big part of it.
I think it's to do with a lot of general kind of confusion of positions now, which is, I mean, for example, Terry brought up this thing, which I saw this as well. But for me, this isn't a problem. The fact that Marks and Spencer's are promoting an RSPCA label doesn't mean anything to me, because the RSPCA has got nothing to do with veganism. But now, when you've got your influencers making a big shame on the RSPCA for being the RSPCA, I don't understand why our movement is so weirdly confused about the RSPCA, which is a traditional animal welfare organization, very conservative, always has been. In the 1970s was chock full of hunters, as we know, because we tried to get them out and all that kind of stuff. But never anything to do with veganism. Even when we were trying to get the hunters out, we weren't expecting the RSPCA to become a vegan organization.
No, not at all. But you see, the problem is the fundamental wrong isn't cruelty. The fundamental wrong isn't the conditions.
But it's our dominant word now, Ronnie.
Yeah, but it's not. But that isn't the fundamental wrong. The fundamental wrong is that those animals are exploited at all. That those animals are oppressed at all. You know, even if a farmer kept, you know, the animals, you know, in their farm on like golden cushions, and fed them the most tasty food, and, you know, made a fuss of them every day, they're still sent to the slaughterhouse, aren't they? They're still sent to the slaughterhouse as a fraction of their natural lifespan, still exploited. That's the fundamental wrong. That's the fundamental wrong. It's not the treatment, it's the exploitation, it's the oppression that's the fundamental wrong. And when we start kind of putting so much emphasis on cruelty, we get away from that.
But that's where the emphasis is. I mean, Colleen here, who is on TikTok a lot now, and well, has been for a good couple of years. But it is true. You don't see injustice, rights. You see, you know, you see those things. Don't be cruel. Don't be an abuser. Be an animal lover.
Yeah, but the thing is, you see those terms used when you have a situation of the oppression of one group of humans by another group of humans. Those terms are used all the time. So why aren't we using those terms in relation to the oppression of other animals by humans? And when we don't use those terms, we somehow lessen the seriousness of that oppression. because we're talking about cruelty, and we're talking about love, and we're talking about all these other things, rather than what we should really be saying. And I think the other thing, in terms of, you know, the fundamental importance of vegan education in terms of creating fundamental and widespread change, in terms of actually bringing about animal liberation. You know, obviously we have to talk about how we do that. You know, how do we get as much vegan education as possible? How do we educate as many people as possible to be vegan? You know, how do, you know, what's the process by which we do that? And I kind of think that one thing that our movement really overlooks is how important the grassroots nature of that is, how important we need to do, how important it is to do that at a grassroots level. You know,
yeah, but wherever it is, Ronnie, the message has got to be right, hasn't it?
The message has got to be right. Yes, of course. First of all, the message has got to be right. And I think that there's a lot of education. I mean, we talk about outreach and inreach. Talk about outreaches to people who aren't vegan. Inreach is talking to people who consider themselves vegan about, you know, what the true nature of veganism is, when a lot of them don't understand that, and when a lot of them kind of get that wrong. So there's education to be done sort of within what you might call the vegan movement, as well as outside the movement. I know you and I are both involved in that. But also this term about grassroots. See, what we kind of have at the moment is, you know, like most vegan outreach takes place in the central big cities. You have, you know, AV, other groups that do things mainly in the center of big cities. But we need to do it everywhere. We need to have it in all communities, you know, in small towns, in villages, in the suburbs of cities.
Well, I get what you're saying, yeah. Ronnie. But what's the point of people going into the suburbs and the villages if all they're saying is don't be cruel?
Well, I think it kind of, I wouldn't say that the language has to be absolutely 100% correct in order to persuade and educate others to become vegan.
Well, this is why I was asking you about your panel, to bring it back to that, and the rose-tinted glasses, because I seem to remember, and I'm in danger of the rose-tinted glasses, I'm sure, but I seem to remember that people back then were very political. They were involved with all kinds of different things. There was none of this kind of separate ourselves off. Let's make animal issues, vegan issues, a thing on its own, just another cause. Whereas people like Donald Watson said that we were the biggest thing since sliced bread and everything, because it covered everything. Now we've got this push to kind of, you know, put walls, stay in your lane. This is a modern day thing. There was none of that. So people were more radical back then, I seem to remember. And that's why I was wondering about the fact that if you bring it all forward now, one of the reasons why you'll never get back to what used to be is that people don't seem to be as radical anymore. Much more single issue, in the kind of Steve Best sense, not greyhounds, but in kind of like veganism is a single issue from his point of view, because you're not seeing the connections with anti-racism and feminism and all that kind of stuff. Those things are kind of a bit scorned about now. So that's what I was trying to get at in terms of, again, what Colleen was saying about we've moderated.
Well, I think, I mean, I think it's, you know, to not be opposed to all forms of oppression is inconsistent with the vegan ethic. You know, if you're going to be opposed to the oppression of other animals by humans, then it kind of stands to reason. You kind of, to be consistent, you have to be opposed to the oppression of one group of humans by another group of humans as well, of course. No. And I mean, I was kind of thinking more about, you know, once again, the importance of people acting on their own initiative, you know, because, you know, while, you know, in terms of vegan outreach, if what what people are doing is waiting around for some global organisation or the local chapter of a global organisation to organise something in their nearest big city that they can go to once a month, right? Then that's severely limiting what people can do in terms of outreach, because where those people live, there'll be thousands and thousands of people who aren't vegan who need to be educated. So I want to see people doing more outreach in their own areas, perhaps as well as going into the middle of the big cities, when there are events there. We need to get...
Ronnie, you know what I'm going to say to that.
Yeah.
I would say, yeah, it's okay, but what's the point of getting a lot of people in villages giving out animal aid leaflets?
Well, I think animal aid leaflets, do. I've given out animal aid leaflets.
Creating a power centre that goes against
but you see,
your economy that you're talking about.
I'd say there's a practical consideration to that. I mean, I'd sooner those people gave out animal aid leaflets or Viva leaflets or vegan society leaflets than didn't do anything.
That's not the end of the story, is it?
No, but
if people were more autonomous, like you were saying.
Well, I think if you're going to have, if we're going to get back to the days of some sort of federation of autonomous local groups, which I'd like to see, and we kind of had that. We had that a bit with the Animal Rights Coalition, didn't we? Back in the day, right? Then if we were able to do that, then you may then have a central point for producing literature, so that any funds that were accrued through the distribution of that literature would actually go to the grassroots. But I think that would be the way to do it. But until that happens, I'd say that the best thing we can do is to actually give out these leaflets produced by the national organisations, because by and large they're provided free, and they'll still have the effect of they still have effect of I've given animal aid leaflets to people and they've gone vegan. They still have the effect of turning people vegan, or it might not be the most ideal perfect situation.
Well,
but until
that is a topic of its own, because Peter Singer has caused people to go vegan, and well,
that's right. But what I'm saying is you kind of don't let perfect be the enemy of good, is a saying, isn't it? It's one of my favourite sayings.
Yeah, but you can't be perfect
in terms
I don't know whether you noticed, Ronnie, but we're in the internet age now.
Yeah.
Well, all you got to do is have Microsoft.
If you look
in 20 minutes.
Let's just look at my individual situation where I am as a coordinator of a local vegan group. That yes, we do to some extent produce our own leaflets, but in order with the number of leaflets we distribute through door dropping and stalls and all that, it just wouldn't be possible for us to produce what we would need ourselves. It really wouldn't. It would just be
costed it
to design. Well, no, the time taken in designing the leaflets, because it's good to have. If you're say doing door dropping and you're door dropping an area and you're saying, I mean, I'll kind of door drop an area. I kind of say about 6 weeks. I'll kind of deliver leaf like the village I live in.
To be honest, my answer to that is quite anarchic, and that's easy. If you want a leaflet that looks like an animal aid one, just rip the animal aid one off and don't put the logo on it.
Yeah, but you've still got to get those printed, and you've still got to pay the printing costs of having those printed.
Yeah, so it's a question of how much that is.
So it's practical. It's just
we have to know how much that is, don't we? Before
just down to the practical consideration. You get those leaflets free from the organisations. All right, so then they get the funds that if anyone makes a donation, but then you get more leaflets and a different type of leaflets. So there's no point in door dropping an area with a leaflet and then 6 weeks door dropping that area the same leaflet again. You'd need to have a different leaflet because some people say, oh, that's just the same leaflet, right? So in order to be able to operating at that level, right? That's the only practical way you can do it.
Minutes, Ronnie.
Yeah, that's the only practical way you can do it. It's just the time taken to design the stuff, and the time and then the and the printing costs. And that's why I say that kind of the practical way of doing that is if we had a federation of grassroots local animal rights groups, then we could set up some kind of print center that would provide the leaflets for all those groups. And I think that's the only practical way we could kind of do that, to keep the money in the grassroots. Because the thing is, like most of these groups where they operate, there's just a couple of people doing it. There aren't these massive loads of people that are prepared to kind of chip in and do different stuff, so it's just a practicality of being able to produce.
The interesting thing about that is the fact that I would have said the same thing about the Federation as you, right? Until I came to Ireland, because now you've got all these different groups. You've got NARA, you had the VIP, you had Declan's group, you had Bernie's group, and all the rest of it, all producing their own stuff, and just doing it on a, it worked. And that means that there was a whole range of leaflets that all these groups are producing.
I think it comes down to specifically what you're trying to do. If what you're focused on is vegan outreach, and you're wanting to concentrate on a particular area and have a variety of different leaflets that you distribute quite frequently, it's just the practicality of being able to kind of produce that number yourself. It's just the practicality to be able to produce that number yourself. It's just down to, do you do nothing, or do you give out the leaflets from national organisation?
Well,
and I'd rather do that.
I understand the practicality point, but it goes against your autonomy point.
Well, yes, of course it does to some extent, and it's not. What I'm saying is, it's not ideal, but it's better than not. If that's the only way that you can do it, is that what it actually enables you to do it, because these organisations are providing free materials, and that's the only way you can do it. It's better to do it that way than not to do it at all.
Yeah, well, obviously everybody's going to agree with that. If that is true, the question is it true? I mean, it's not true in Ireland.
Well, it's certainly
true in England.
From my point of view, it's actually true. There's no way that the amount of leaflets that I distribute and the different types of leaflets I distribute, there's no way I would be able to have either the time to design them or the money to get them printed. And if that's true for me, that's going to be true for a lot of other people.
Fair enough. I'm just.
Until we get, if ever we get that kind of federation, which I'd love to see, I'd love to see that happen, but until that happens and we have somewhere, like a central.
I'm not trying to put you on the spot here, Ronnie.
No. I mean, I understand that. I totally understand that would be the ideal situation. That would be a better situation, but it's like.
And also
until that happens, but in order for that to happen, you have to have these groups first. You have to have these, groups at grassroots in all the, because I'm particularly focused on vegan outreach. I'm looking at, having, vegan outreach groups in these areas. But then, of course, if you had a general animal rights group, then obviously I like to think that part of their activities would be vegan outreach as well. At one time it wouldn't have been. We know in the days when everyone campaigned on the kind of single issues and no one did outreach, don't we? We go back to the back to the 70s and 80s when that was the case. But now you'd hope that vegan outreach would be incorporated into the work of a local animal rights group.
Oh yeah, well that goes without saying as well. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, well, your position is getting some support. So Steve is saying that they support Animal Aid, and Animal Aid. Let's face it, they've given out hundreds of thousands, if not millions, now of leaflets since 1977.
And, the other thing that I think I kind of think could be done more of. And at the moment, this obviously involves the national organisations. I mean, obviously, you know, this conversation is very UK based, and there'll be people, you know, either watching this live or watching the recording who are in other countries, so they'll have different organisations there, and it'll be, you know, it won't be exactly the same as here. I think one big area that's probably underused is television advertising, where you can reach hundreds of thousands of people. Now, Viva over here have done a couple of adverts that have gone on the television. And you know, that's an area. I mean, I think one of the problems with the, you know, the vegan community is that far too few vegans are actually active, you know, in any way other than just kind of sort of being a vegan, I suppose. You know, so we've got hardly any vegans, or very few vegans are actually active in spreading the vegan message. And I think it's crucial. I think in the sense that that's kind of key, that we, you know, that more vegans kind of get active.
Yeah, but it begs a few questions, Ronnie. First of all, say using England again as a template, is you've got access to free leaflets, you've got access to the internet, and it's easier now than ever, and yet it's not happening. So why?
It's I think because you know, for a lot of people who consider themselves vegan, veganism is kind of add-on. That because it's become so easy. You see, back in the day, if you became vegan, that was you out of society. Really, you kind of, you know, you couldn't operate in ordinary society. You know, you couldn't eat out anywhere.
Who wants to?
And I didn't want to. Bugger it. You know, I don't consider myself part of ordinary society now. You know, I'm not. To me, it's the land of the enemy. You know, in terms of like, it's totally alien to the sort of world I'd like to see. You know, and you have to operate it and you know, go out and stick a smile on your face and stuff, don't you? You know, but you see, I think with most vegans that isn't the case. I think because it's so easy now to live like a so-called normal life as a vegan, because you can eat out anywhere. You can put the same thing on your plate that looks exactly the same as the food you ate before, except that it's kind of, you know, it doesn't contain animals.
Well, here's a difficult question then, and I've asked this before, and I think you've answered this. Is that, do you think that there's a big percentage of people who call themselves vegan who really aren't?
Well, I think I kind of think it depends on you know, what you consider the definition of veganism is, but I think that yeah, I think there are a lot of people that only consider it to be a diet. You know, that it's only about not consuming animal products. I think there's a lot of people like that, when that quite definitely isn't the case. You know, whatever people, you go back to what the founders of the vegan movement said, and people like Leslie Cross and Donald Watson. One thing is absolutely certain, that they considered it to be opposition to all exploitation of animals, didn't they? You know, that's absolutely certain. There's no way that it's just a diet. No way whatsoever that it's just a diet. And anyone that says that, that's completely against what the founders of the movement intended. But I think there are a lot of people that probably do think that, and they're just kind of, they're people who don't consume animal products, but that isn't, you know, veganism is more than that. So I think that is true. Yeah, I think that's true.
I mean, there are people now putting out videos saying that we should ignore what the founders said, because
well, you can't. Yeah, but then you can't call it vegan, can you? You can't call it, because, you know, it's like saying, you know, I'll ignore what Karl Marx said and I'll still be a Marxist.
Well, they're kind of trying to kind of say, well, look, it's well, you see, that's an interesting one from an academic point of view, because when the Marxists did do that, they then started calling themselves neo-Marxists or critical theories. What they didn't do is say, I'm a Marxist, but all that stuff from Karl Marx is a load of bullshit, right? But we do have that in the vegan movement. So it's not as though anybody's calling themselves neo-vegan or something else. They still want the traditional name, but they want to reject the traditional values, right? And they're arguing that that's the right thing to do, as though it's some kind of form of evolution, which is an interesting idea because social movements do have to evolve, otherwise they stagnate. So that is true. It's a quite a nuanced argument, but to actually jettison the original values of veganism because they don't like it, because it was too political for them or too radical for them.
I think a lot of people aren't even aware of it, and they become what they think is vegan. And then when someone says, "Well, actually, it's more than that," then that's when you meet.
Yeah, but the worrying thing, though, Ronnie, is that there are some people who have took the time to read Cross and read Watson, and they don't like what they're finding because it's too radical for them. It's back to what Colleen said. We've got a moderate society compared to before. And it goes back to your panel. You could have had the kind of stuff that you had back then. It's not even possible to have it now, even if you wanted it. I mean, technological, but also the people are different.
Yeah, I think this is a thing. And then there's a lot of reasons why it would be very hard to have the ALF again like the ALF was. A lot of it's to do with the actions of the state in various ways, but it's also to do with how people have changed. It's particularly to do with how young people have changed, because we're all young, you'd rarely get anyone sort of involved in the ALF who was over 30. I mean, you'd get older people give us money. People give money out of their pension and stuff to us, to fund our activities. But the actual activists, but you look at activism now, the percentage of like young people involved is small. And you get far more people who are pensioners than you get people who are like under 30 involved in stuff. No. And so there's a reason why that is. Why is it that we have so few young people now? And is social media to blame for that? Does that play a big part, that they're all on social media rather than getting out and being active? No. But the other thing I wanted to also say is about in terms of direct action, and kind of how direct action has had to change from what it was, because this is another aspect of how kind of the type of action we take has had to change, or does have to change in terms of how society's changed. And kind of what you're seeing is a different form of direct action, where people aren't trying to get away. I mean, the idea of the ALF really, I mean, the ALF went through a bit of an evolution in terms of kind of what we intended, what we kind of wanted through our actions. And it kind of started off with, we're going to do the, sort of almost the minimum damage to prevent, like we started off by attacking hunt vehicles, at the hunt kennels. And we wouldn't destroy the vehicles. We'd do quite small things to stop them actually going out on the hunt, And then that over time evolved to this idea of economic sabotage, that what you try and do is cause the maximum damage in order to kind of put these people out of business. And that's kind of how it kind of evolved to that. So you had people doing things that were very serious in terms of, I suppose, criminality that would attract, really high prison sentences if people were caught. So obviously it was really important to get away. It was obviously really important to kind of do the stuff and then not be caught. And so quite often more time was spent on planning how to get away than was spent on planning how to do the action, because getting away was like so important. And there were sometimes people didn't get away, sometimes they were arrested afterwards, but a lot of people kind of did get away with stuff. But now that's become pretty much impossible because of surveillance. They can track people, on roads. There's all sorts of surveillance cameras everywhere, isn't there? So it's really difficult to do something that's like really serious in terms of criminality and actually get away with it. So the kind of direct action has to change. And now you're doing, I think really what's happening is you've got action now. It's more aimed at awareness raising, where people are kind of, like the people that rescued the beagles from MBR Acres. In the old days, there was a time, I think there was a raid there years ago where I think 85 beagles were arrested and everyone got away, and I don't know whether some people were prosecuted later, but certainly no one waited around to be arrested. But now, when they rescued those beagles, they gave themselves up to the police, because that was part of it. That was part of the awareness raising, to say, well, look, I rescued beagles. I didn't do anything wrong. I'm not ashamed of it. Here I am giving myself up to the police. It's like a kind of really strong statement in terms of raising awareness. And you've got these activities like, for instance, that, my wife Louise is involved in, where people are going and causing the small amounts of damage outside these laboratories or breeding places, and they're kind of handcuffing themselves to the gates and waiting to be arrested, because that's like, all part of the, all part of, what they're trying to do in terms of people making people aware. And that's kind of how, that's how direct action has changed, and really how it's had to change. And I think it's, it's still got a really big part to play, but it's kind of more, it's playing a much more educational role now than it was, because I don't think what we did with the ALF, we weren't aiming to educate the public. We weren't interested in the public. We were interested in just causing maximum damage to those companies. So we weren't really interested in awareness raising, whereas now I think awareness raising is the most important thing, in making people aware of things so those people can take their own actions, for instance. And I think that's how direct action's changed and how it's had to change. But once again, that would be much more effective if it became more autonomous. If you had, you've had, for instance, Animal Rebellion, Animal Rising organising, that type of direct action. But instead of people kind of waiting around to be kind of virtually told what to do by those organisations, to just do it themselves, to act on their own initiative, to act autonomously. And I think there'd be lots more actions if people did that, and there'd be much more awareness raising if people acted more on their own initiative.
Yeah, I suppose it's to do with it's really weird, isn't it? The fact that we've got like an instant, second by second global communication system, and yet we seem to be less connected to each other than we were. I mean, when you think back to, how did the NAL put together 7 or 8 vans, transit vans?
I know.
I mean, like how
it's
did
true.
that happen? It's almost like you think, I can't even remember how that happened. It's impossible.
Well, I think there was a lot of use of telephone trees, weren't there? When one person would phone 5 people, and those 5 people would then phone. Everyone had a list of contacts. And so I'd phone 5 people, and each of those people would phone 5 people themselves, and each of those people would phone 5 people. And that's how you spread, because that was the only way you could organise a short-term protest, demonstration, direct action, whatever. If it was more long-term, you could send stuff out like newsletters and stuff like that. But if you decided, say, you wanted to do something next week, then what would happen is you would use this kind of telephone tree and do it that way.
I think one thing was the case, is that when people committed to something, they kept to it by and large, because they would be letting a lot of people down if they didn't. Whereas now you could just make a call and say, I can't make it. I mean, we didn't even have mobile phones or anything.
No, we only had landlines. you know.
Yeah.
And
And most of
payphone, I
those
used to organise stuff on
were
payphone.
broken and stuff. So
Yeah. You see, this is the thing. It's the kind of, there was a lot more activism at a time when it was much harder to organise that activism, you know, because we didn't have access to the internet. No.
Well, we're probably coming to the end. We've got a question about lab meat. Don't know whether we want to. Have we done a program about that kind of stuff?
Well, do we need it? We don't need it, do we? We can, you know. I mean, I don't think. You know, I mean, I come from a day when I first became vegan when you didn't even have any, you know, the kind of, you know, vegan friendly versions of
anything.
all these things. It was lentils and beans, and I'd be quite happy if that was still all there was. You know,
Yeah, but you know that a lot of vegans get their knickers in a twist if somebody says that their animal companion is on a plant-based diet. Well, it would be useful for that, wouldn't it?
Yes, but you see, I mean, I think the thing is, you know, this you get the synthetic meat that's grown from animal cells, actual animal cells, and I think there's been some discussion about that. Well, is that actually vegan? Because first of all, like, it's animal cells, and secondly, I don't know about the, you know, how it's cultured, whether that involves some kind of exploitation of other animals, you know, like in that process. I don't know.
Yeah, it's got to be in some kind of solution.
Yeah, it does need animal cells. So technically, if you know, like in terms of like you're still eating animal products.
Well, I haven't really. I mean, I'm not that interested in this issue. But
No.
No.
But you see, there are ways that you can. There are ways that you can replicate those things without actually using animal cells. I mean, there's a project called Reboot Food, and that might be where people are looking it up on the internet. And it's George Monbiot, the environmentalist, who he advocates a vegan diet. I wouldn't say he's vegan in terms of his philosophy, but he certainly advocates that we should end animal farming. Really for for environmental reasons, and basically he's big into this bacterial fermentation where you produce proteins and fats or oils through bacterial fermentation rather than through animal farming or growing crops. And the reason for that is because it would free up the amount of land you need to produce those things through this bacterial fermentation is massively less than the amount of land you need to do it, you know, through animal farming or growing crops. And so the land that was like left free could be rewilded, you know, could go back to forest and other forms of natural habitat, and so that would be you know, massively beneficial to.
I still don't see why you just can't take a biopsy from humans. I wonder whether we'd ever be able to get past the yuck factor.
Well, yeah, I mean, you could, because it's exactly the same. So I think that you know, that probably has much more potential, because you wouldn't get the objection from vegans because you're not using animals. I mean, bacteria aren't animals. You're not using animals to produce that, and yet you can exactly replicate meat, and you can exactly replicate dairy products through bacterial fermentation without using animal cells. And that's probably a more you know, that's I would say that's a kind of probably, you know, better way forward.
The latest I heard, but like I say, I haven't really kind of kept up on this, Ronnie, to be honest, but I heard that you could get, you know, if you went to an animal sanctuary and got a feather, then there you are. That's the basic animal cell component that you need in terms of the beginning of the process. I don't know for sure. I'm
not sure. It might be a different type of cell than what you, because it's not, you know, we don't eat feathers, do we? So, well, nobody does. So whether that's the same type of cell, I kind of don't know. But I don't think we need.
Then you do have the vivisection angle to it, as Jonah is saying here, and then this thing about the bovine fetal.
Yeah. You see, there's all that. Yeah. And like we kind of don't need it. I think exactly the same type of stuff could be replicated.
It does seem to be rather weird to go through all of this for something you don't even need in the first place.
I know. It's kind of odd, and I mean, I'd say it's coming from a day when we didn't even have the, vegan equivalents of dairy products. Well, we had plant milk, didn't we? We had, we did have one or two plant milks back in the day, but not what we've got now.
I tell you, a related issue, is the fact that even now, non-vegans are still perplexed by the idea that you've got vegan meats and stuff. They seem to. I mean, to be honest, I think a lot of what they say is disingenuous. I think it's just a way of beating vegans over the head.
They're desperately trying to find any excuse, aren't they, to justify carrying on consuming.
Yeah, but I think it might be a bit of a puzzle for them too.
Well, the thing is, it's not to do. It isn't to do with the taste, isn't it? I mean, like I'll always say that basically the reasons why
it's taste and texture, isn't it?
Yeah, it's taste and texture, but providing that if no animals have been slaughtered or oppressed or exploited or killed to produce that, the problem with meat, say, for a vegan isn't the taste and texture, it's the kind of what it involves. It's the oppression and exploitation of other animals that it involves. That's the problem for us. It isn't the taste and texture we've got a problem with.
I remember a few years ago, you arguing that if somebody said, well, what about, a vegan burger? You always used to say, well, yeah, but there's nobody in this one. There's nobody there.
Well, yeah, that's right. There isn't, no animal has been.
Well, there's no one there, is there? I mean, there isn't anyone you can say, there's a body or there's a part of a body.
No, absolutely, no, absolutely. So really, they're kind of, they're not understanding, or perhaps deliberately misunderstanding the reasons why a vegan doesn't want to eat a piece of meat. It isn't anything to do with the texture or the taste. I mean, there are people that can't eat. There are people that can't eat the kind of the sort of plant-based burgers and stuff because it's they feel it's too much like meat and it reminds them of it, and so they can't eat it. I know people like that. Particularly maybe not so much the burgers, but more the kind of the stuff that is made to be similar to steak or similar to other chicken pieces and stuff like that. I know people that can't eat that.
Here's a question for you, Ronnie. Does Mumbio advocate?
Well, yes. Well, Mum, you see, this is a reason why he's not. As I say, he doesn't really advocate eating. He doesn't advocate eating insects as a way of feeding the world. Mainly because he believes it's not an efficient way of that. There's various problems with that in terms of scaling up the production of it to provide protein for people. That's the reason he doesn't advocate it. It's more it isn't because he cares about insects, because he eats insects himself when he's going round, because he's got an orchard, and when he's going round the orchard, if he'll eat insects off the trees, pick insects and eat them. Ones that he think might damage the fruit, he actually eats them.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah. Well, in his book, Regenesis, he says that. He's got a book, Regenesis, which kind of argues really. It's about completely changing the farming system. And particularly getting rid of animal farming.
Terry, then he's not heard that. So
no, he doesn't. He doesn't advocate eating insects. He doesn't think that
he just does it. He doesn't advocate.
He doesn't. He doesn't say that it's. He's kind of talking about food systems. He's talking about like how can we feed the world? What's the best way of producing food to feed the world? And he thinks like kind of doing it through. Thinks doing it through animal farming is kind of is a really bad way of doing it for lots of different reasons.
Yeah, I think
he doesn't think that insect farming is a good way of doing it. For various reasons, but that isn't because he's concerned about the individual insects. If you see what I mean.
Yeah, well,
You know,
that's an interesting thing though, because it does invoke the usual traditional thing that animal advocates have said for years and years, which is the benefit of the doubt thing, because there is still some debate about whether insects are sentient beings. If they're not, they're kind of outside of the scope of animal
yeah.
rights theory.
There was some research fairly recently, and you always wonder about how they've done this research, don't you? That claimed to show that bees were sentient. Now, whether that means other insects are sentient as well, I kind of don't know. But there certainly was, they did come up with this paper saying there's a lot of evidence that bees are actually sentient.
Yeah, in this,
So,
well, we can go forever with that, in the sense that, they're still arguing about whether fishes are sentient.
no,
I thought that was sorted out years ago.
yeah, it was sorted out years ago. It was sorted
Yeah.
out years ago.
Hmm.
But of course, it's like, people clutch at straws to carry on doing what they've always done, weren't they? And this is
the problem there, Gary, is that the first thing you get, say, on somewhere like TikTok, is everybody would say, in that case, what about plants, right? And so I suppose then you might say, is a plant a being? I mean, you'd end up being, you'd end up with semantics of language and stuff, because there are still a lot of people who will insist that plants are sentient, even the idea that they scream and all that kind of stuff. Whether they're just, like, half the time you just think these people are just piss takers, but there's a heck of a lot of them. Now, are they just clutching at straws? Because
more clutching at plants. Yeah.
Yes.
Is straw sentient? Straw.
Are they so desperate to carry on exploiting our fellow animals that they would basically say anything?
Well, I think it is kind of clutching at straws to carry on doing what they've always done. And I think this is like, there's lots of ways people actually do that, isn't there? But we've kind of strayed a bit from the conference, really, haven't we? Although it's been very interesting.
Yeah, rather.
I think that, as I say,
we'll try and sum things up in 3 minutes, and then we'll go.
Right. Okay. Well, I thought there was, a lot of positive things about the conference. Although I kind of, my experience of it was kind of quite limited because I wasn't able to see any of the other talks. But I think it was kind of like a showcase of different forms of activism. So if people went there that weren't activists, they had the opportunity of listening to different speakers and deciding on what sort of activism they want to do. How many people went there that aren't already activists? I kind of don't know. There were some people, I think, on social media complaining about the cost, because I think it was something like £130 to attend, and there's some people thought that was prohibitive, and obviously that would prohibit some people from attending. On the other hand, they're going to put all the talks online, so people will be able to. That's not going to be completely done. Maybe 2 or 3 months before that's done completely. But
was your panel recorded then?
Yes, it's recorded. Yeah, it will eventually appear online. It was all recorded. Apparently the whole lot. So all these talks and panels and everything, people will be able to listen to them. So people that weren't able to afford to go to the conference will still be able to, kind of listen to what everyone had to say. So there is that. It kind of, I was saying to Mel about how it used to be back in the day when we had the equivalent of it really was when we had the animal rights gatherings, wasn't it, back in the day, where everyone would camp in a field and there'd be a big tent. I think veggies were there doing the food, and it would be the free to go, or it would be very, very cheap to go and camp there. And that was how it was. That was how it was back in the day. And now we're at a kind of 4-star hotel doing something. Well, on a bigger scale, obviously, this is on a bigger scale.
Well, there's a vegan festival in Belfast the weekend. That was in a hotel, but we can't all go camping. But
no, I mean, I don't go camping now. No way I'd go camping now.
Right, I want to wrap this up really, but I want to also finish on Sentient Rights Island tomorrow. I've got an event with Deb Thompson, who, as you know, is regular in the chat.
Yes.
And so that's at 7 o'clock, and it's on Zoom. So
right.
if you
tune into that, I think.
So it's not like this. It's not StreamYard. It's not on YouTube.
Yeah.
It's a Zoom meeting.
Yeah, but kind of let me carry on briefly summing up, shall I?
Oh, sorry.
Because I mean, and I think the general theme was, we need all forms of activism, and we're presenting all forms of activism at this conference, so you can come along and kind of decide, listen to everything and decide, what you want to do in terms of activism, and hopefully, will cause more people to become active in one way or another, and that's fine. I'm kind of okay with that. I think different people are cut out to do different things, and people are always best at doing what they're kind of cut out to do, So I'm not opposed to people that kind of want to do pressure campaigning. That's it's fine by me. That's what they want to do, what they feel they're good at. Same with all sorts of things. But really, my position isn't really an instead position. I'm not saying I'm a big advocate of vegan outreach. I'm not saying I want people to do vegan outreach instead of these other things. My position is a kind of more of an unless position. That unless we have a lot more vegan outreach, we aren't going to get very far. We're always going to be very limited in how far along the road we go to achieving animal liberation, because the only way you change things at a fundamental level is by fundamentally changing the mindset of a lot of ordinary people, and you can only do that through vegan outreach. So it's an unless position. Unless we have this huge increase in vegan education, then all we're ever going to get is kind of crumbs from the table. And so really it's kind of where I look for this increase in vegan outreach is to the vegan community, and for vegans who aren't active at the moment to become active in outreach. And I hope a lot of those people are going to listen to this, if they may not be in the chat, but this gets widely shared on social media, and I hope there'll be people listening to the recording who will consider getting active after they've heard what I have to say. But probably most important of all, we need people who are instigators. In every area, in every local area, we need someone who'll say, right, I'm going to instigate vegan outreach here. I'm gonna do what I can myself. There's lots of ways we can do it just on our own. I'm gonna try and get local vegans active. I encourage them to get active. Form a local group, and educate people in this area to become vegan. And I think unless we have a hell of a lot of that, we never, whatever else people are doing, whatever great stuff other people are doing in terms of activism, unless we have massively more vegan outreach, we're never going to get very far. So that's, to me, that's crucial.
Would you say you've still got faith in, you keep talking about ordinary people?
Well, I'm talking about, you mean ordinary non-vegan people? They might change.
Well, I mean, they're the ones that we're going to have to.
Yeah. Well, I think what the evidence is. Like I said earlier, that the most successful ways of creating change have been direct action and education, and there certainly has been a huge success with education. When you think about, there has been a big increase in in the number of vegans. It's not been big enough to hold back the increase in the consumption of animal products. The consumption of animal products is increasing all the time, for two main reasons. First of all, because more people are being born, and most of them are consuming animal products, and secondly, because quite a lot of it to do with factory farming bringing the price of animal products down.
I got a terrible feeling that you dodged my question there, Ronnie. Do you have faith in ordinary people?
Do I have faith in? I don't have faith in anything. Faith is like, it's kind of like religion, isn't it? You have faith. No, I don't kind of. I don't kind of think in those terms. I just think in, if we are going to achieve animal liberation, what do we need to do? Now, in terms of, is there evidence that ordinary people can change? Yes. A lot of people have become vegan, not as many as we'd like. A lot of people have become vegan. A lot of people have changed. I mean, I was a huge meat eater. I was, before I became vegetarian and then vegan. So I changed. So people can change, but they're not going to change unless they receive the information that they need to receive in order to change. And so we have to get a lot more of that information out there, whether that's by leaflets, whether that's by advertising on the television, on social media, whether that's through posters, whether that's through stuff on on videos on YouTube or whatever. All these different ways, or in the street, all these different ways of spreading the vegan message. We need more of all of them, so we reach more people, and we need far more vegans involved in outreach, so we can do that. And we need far more vegans to become instigators.
I think we've got a defining issues problem here, because I've seen a few memes going around, which I've kind of liked and everything, which basically saying, as soon as the kind of grab a pussy thing happened, you thought, right, that's going to be the end of it for Trump, and yet you've got the chances of him becoming the president of the United States again. And we've also got Vegans for Trump Facebook page. Now, are they vegans?
Well, you see, even if you looked at veganism as only being about non-human animals, right? Then you've got a guy there that kind of is pretty much a climate change denier, and he's done loads of things, in laws that he's passed and all that. He's done loads of things that harm other animals, either directly or through the harm those measures have caused to the environment and the natural world. So even from the point of veganism only being about other animals, how can someone...
You just mentioned environment and natural world. They would say that that's irrelevant.
Well, but it's not, because how is it consistent? If you're a vegan and that means opposition, because the very minimum veganism means is opposition to the exploitation of other animals by humans. That's the very minimum, going back to what the founders of the vegan movement said. That's very minimum, right? So if that's what you believe, then how can you not be opposed to animals being oppressed, to animals being harmed in other ways, even if those ways aren't exploitation? How is it consistent? It's not, is it? One must follow the other.
Well, there is an argument. I mean, there's a couple of points to it. One is that there was some talk about the fact that apparently there are people going to camp out from Australia in order to see Earthling Ed, and then you've got the kind of Lewis Hamilton type argument. There is the argument that veganism has got nothing to do with the environment. It's to do with the exploitation of our fellow animals. And so it doesn't matter if you fly around the world, because that's nothing to do with the exploitation of other animals.
Why are you opposed to the exploitation of other animals? What motivation is that? This concern about the other animals, right? So you're concerned about them being harmed when they're exploited, but you're not concerned about them being harmed when that isn't exploitation. I mean, how does that go together?
Well,
I don't care.
It's based on the reading of Cross that veganism is about humans not exploiting.
Yeah, but you see, the thing is, even if that is accepted as a definition of veganism, right? It's okay. This is a definition of veganism, right? But like, are these other things, even though they might not be in the definition, are they consistent with veganism? Are they consistent with veganism? If you see what I mean, how can you kind of hold that view, but like not at the same time hold this other view as well? Because that it doesn't fit for you not to do that. You know, that I'm so concerned about, you know, what happens to other animals. I'm opposed to humans exploiting them. If I'm driving my car along the road and there's an animal in the road, I'm not going to be bothered to swerve to avoid that animal, because that's nothing to do with exploitation.
Well, yeah, I mean, there are a couple of people who would make that argument. Yeah. Anyway, well, I think we've probably at the end of our tether.
Yeah,
we're over 2 hours. So, are you happy with your summary of what you said?
Yes, I kind of am really, and I think we kind of need to, you know, and I think the other thing is that you're kind of individual. You're talking about. I'm talking about, like, you know, we need more vegans to become active, but that doesn't mean that isn't asking for a massive amount from all those individual people, because, you know, I'm not talking about necessarily those people, you know, getting out there and doing some big form of activism that would cause them a lot of stress and, you know, take a lot of time. There's loads of stuff that people can do in their everyday life, or just by taking, you know, it kind of takes me an hour to, say, deliver 100 leaflets on average. You know, are people saying they haven't got an hour to spare now and again? You know, it's all these small things. If you know, we all did more to spread the vegan message. Say, well, you know, I'm going to try and do as much as I can in my spare time to spread the vegan message in whatever way I can. If we all had that attitude, then it would all add up. It would all add up, and there would be a massive amount of information spread, wouldn't there? And that's the thing. It's not necessarily asking people to kind of do, you know, to do like anything like really big. It's like asking a lot of people to do things that are probably fairly small, but which all add up. You know, and I think that if we kind of, you know, I think people have, maybe when you use the word activism, people think about that it's something where it's a big thing, involves a lot of shouting, and like you might be arrested, and you know what I mean. You know that you know, activism kind of conjures up that, you know, that image, I think, in a lot of people's mind, when that isn't. You know, activism can be, you know, leaving a leaflet on the seat of a train, you know, for people to, you know, for someone to pick up and to be mindful.
Here's an interesting social psychological take on why people might not be active. Be interested to know what you say about this. Now, obviously, if you're going to be part of a cube, you're going to see things that might be distressing and cause trauma. If you're somebody who's talking to people, you're going to have to talk about things that are pretty unpleasant. I mean, it's World Day tomorrow. We're going to end up talking about animal experimentation and stuff. Now, also, people might say that what about the idea of even giving leaflets about how traumatic it is to be handling the leaflets because of the images and what it says?
I think it depends. I think it depends on what leaflet it is. I mean, when I deliver leaflets to people's homes, I never deliver anything with graphic images, because children might get hold of them, and I don't think there's a need for graphic images, to be honest, to spread the message.
It might depend on what you think is a graphic image. See, I remember there was a question mark about. It ended up on all over the national news in Ireland about one of the Go Vegan world ones, which they tend not to use graphic images, but one picture or one billboard showed a child, and also just their main slogan, which was "Dairy takes babies away from mothers." There's a suggestion that creates trauma because children ask their mothers, "What does it mean taking babies away from their mothers?" And then the idea was that then I mean, this is not me saying any of this, Ronnie.
Yeah, I know. I kind of know what you mean. But you see, the thing is,
the poor old speciesist parents.
If you're saying about the vegans not wanting to handle those leaflets, right? Well, I think it's a question of thinking about, well, look, what about the animals that are going through that? And how are you going to stop the animals going through that? Because unless we educate other people to go vegan, those animals are still going to go through that. So no matter what you feel, no matter what the kind of negative effect on you of like handling those leaflets, many times more is a negative effect on the animals that actually go through that. And I think you have to have that, you know, you got to toughen up a bit, really. You got to kind of, you know what I mean? If we're going to put an end to these things.
I know what you mean, but the counter argument is some people just can't do it, Ronnie.
Well, I think people make an excuse. I think you know, I think all vegans could do it. I think they all could. I don't think that, you know, if you don't want to handle leaflets with anything like that on, you can get some that don't have anything like that on, that aren't, you know, don't really have any images of other animals on. If you really,
I just wonder whether there is a feeling in the movement, and I'm not advocating for this at all. I'm just raising it that being an activist automatically means that you need to know stuff which is upsetting.
I think, yeah, I think we do need to know stuff. I don't think we need to know massive detail.
Well, figures. You were giving figures about how many of our fellow animals are killed per second.
Yes.
Well, that might be traumatic. The argument goes to say that, know that
it might be, but you see, you know, the biggest trauma is to those animals that are killed. You know, come on, you know, people need to stop being so precious about themselves. You know, get out of your comfort zone, and you know, it's the animals that are going through it, not you. You're not, you know, you're not going to be killed. You're not going to be kind of, you know, you're not incarcerated in some kind of, you know, some kind of farm or a laboratory or whatever. You're not going to go on a truck to the storehouse. You're not going to have your throat cut. You know, for heaven's sake, you know, don't be so precious about yourself and toughen up a bit and kind of go out there and do a bit of activism. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, I knew.
You know what I mean? I mean, there is this self-preciousness now.
Grow a backbone
that we didn't have. There's all this there's all this therapy now. You know, you can't do a bit of activism without having like 20,000 minutes of Zoom calls with the therapist afterwards. You know, what is this? You know, we used to just kind of do stuff. There's all this self-preciousness. Oh, you know, how do you feel about this? And all like, oh, you know, and all that. For fuck's sake, you know, it's the animals that are the ones that are suffering. You know, stop being so, you know, precious about yourself, and you know, toughen up a bit and kind of, you know. I kind of do feel this. There's this, you know.
I'm telling you, you're prejudiced against invertebrates. That's what you are, mate.
Yeah, but yeah. I mean that's right. You know, where is this? You know, that's kind of, you know, it's this is about, you know, this horrendous stuff that's being done by humans to other animals.
Yeah, I mean,
you know,
obviously, I would say pretty much what you just said. But I do think it could be a genuine impediment to what you want.
Well, I think it's a genuine impediment if people let it be. If people get sucked into this kind of inward type of thinking about their own self and now, oh dear, oh, what about me and how I feel and my mental state and all that. If people get sucked in too much about that.
Well, isn't that the neoliberal project, Ronnie?
Sorry?
Isn't that the neoliberal project, kind of like self-introspection and all this kind of stuff and all that?
Well, the neoliberal project is really about people just, being
selfish.
Only caring about themselves and being selfish.
Yeah,
and yes. I mean, it's similar. Yeah. This is similar. Like we kind of need to think about, like, it's like when when I was in jail, right? I never for a second felt sorry for myself because I knew that my situation was like, a billion times less less kind of painful for me than the situation of other animals that were being oppressed and exploited. So I thought of that. I thought, no, I've got no right to feel down. I've got no right to feel depressed. I've got no right to, bemoan my own.
I felt exactly the same when I was bodily thrown into a bare cell in a zoot suit, which is just like a tunic, no clothes, in solitary confinement. That's what I felt.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah,
and Gary Francione argues that argument is also relevant to the issue of like burnout. You don't have the right to burn out. Oh, he actually said to himself, "I don't have the right to burn out." But for some people, that's pretty tough,
Well, I think, people have to, focus on what it's all about, have to focus on kind of what's happening to the animals. And that's the number one thing that we have there to drive us forward, to overcome, this kind of sort of introspection and sorry for. Yeah, I mean, I think that I think burnout can be a real thing in terms of maybe things like fatigue. People can't help becoming tired, for instance. But like the answer to that is not to give up, campaigning for other animals. The answer to that is to find maybe other ways of campaigning that kind of aren't so stressful or aren't so tiring. I mean, we always have to do that,
the only problem with that is that there again, you've got the issue bouncing around in your head because you're finding ways of campaigning. Some people just think you've got to have a break from that kind of thing. I personally don't, and I never have.
I mean, I've over the years I've had to change the way I campaign, and I campaign in a much less stressful way and much less tiring way now than I used to. But
you've never had a situation where you needed to actually take a break from the issue.
No,
to kind of
neither
have I. But that is
and I wouldn't.
You need to empty your head about.
I wouldn't want to. I
exploitation.
wouldn't want to take a. I wouldn't want to take a break. Wouldn't want to take a break. I mean, like kind of. Would someone in the French Resistance need to take a break from fighting the Nazi occupation? Because I mean, basically, that's what it is, isn't it? We've got the world occupied by an oppressor species, haven't we? To the horrendous, no matter how bad the Nazis were, what the humans do to other animals is like a million times worse, isn't it? And
I'll put that up on the screen for you, Ronnie, because it doesn't happen very often.
No, it doesn't. No. But yes, I mean, it's good that someone agrees with me. It's brilliant. It's one person. But, like we kind of need to think about what the true situation is. What are the true conditions of existence on this planet? And I think it's all too easy to forget and to kind of be. And of course, we're encouraged to forget. We have all these distractions around us, the telly, and people talk about shit on social media about all these tiny little things that people discuss and these meaningless things really that kind of take up people's time that distract us from this overwhelming situation of oppression. You know, like I've spoken before, we did a show about how I've compared it to the Matrix, you know, with the Matrix, where there was this people were oblivious to the true conditions of their existence, and the true horror of the situation. And in a sense, that's kind of, you know, how humans are with regard to the oppression of other animals, that they kind of everyone sort of lives their life as if this underlying horror, this horrendous situation isn't happening, you know. And I think we can kind of, you know, even as vegans, I think people can do that. People just get on with their ordinary life. Oh, I'm vegan, I don't eat animal products, right? That's that box ticked. Now I'll just get on and do all the things that I used to do, even though that, you know, most of those things are kind of pretty meaningless, really, you know. And those people are doing the same. Those people are kind of ignoring the true conditions of existence. Those people are also ignoring this horrendous oppression, this horrendous tyranny. Because the only authentic way to live, the only kind of real way to live, is actually in struggle against that. That's the only way you can live a decent life, because this is such a horrendous situation. To, you know, like, to ignore it and to not become active in fighting it is kind of like you're not really living properly. You're not really living properly. You're living a false existence. You know, like almost in the Matrix.
You think it's a form of you think it's not authentic, don't you?
It's a false consciousness. It's a false consciousness, because you know, an authentic life is lived in struggle. You know, because you know, we're on a planet where you've got this one species, you know, oppresses other species in the most horrendous way. So how can you live in a situation where you ignore that? How can you live in a situation where you don't do anything about that? And even if you're vegan, how can you say, all right, like, I'm kind of not going to be, I'm going to try not to have anything to do with it, and now let me get on and just do all the kind of little things and watch the telly and whatever I do. You know,
I mean, obviously,
Tilly agrees with me, don't you, Till? Come on. Oh dear.
Yeah. But I mean, I think willful ignorance is a real thing, don't you?
Yes, I do. I think people are willfully ignorant. People.
Well, that's how they do what you've just asked.
That's how they do. But that, you know, but why would you want to live your life in a state of unreality? Because it is a state of unreality to ignore that.
Because reality is too painful.
But, you know, do we really want to, you know, is that, to me, I can't, you know, I can't understand that. I'd rather face up to what the true situation is and try to do something about that. And that doesn't mean that within that you can't have fun, and you can't laugh, and you can't joke, and you can't enjoy yourself, you know.
Well, I guess we all know which Matrix pill that you'll be taking.
Well, yeah, which I forget what the colours were now, but it would be the one
red and blue, isn't it? But I don't know.
It would be the one where I was aware of what was going on. Yeah, of course. You know, how can you not want to be? Because it doesn't. You can still, you know, and I think I think it leads to a better life and a happier life to know that you're part of this struggle to end the, you know, the greatest form of oppression.
It's a little bit like bread and circuses, though, isn't it, Ronnie? The fact is that you know, some people would argue that the ruling class, let's use that phrase just for the moment, that they require people to be distracted by professional football and TV.
Yes.
And
yes, and celebrities. See, this is another thing. It's celebrities. You know, the celebrity thing. This is another form of distraction, and yet we integrate celebrities into our movement, don't we? But there's loads of them speaking at Camp Out, all these celebrities. And yet that celebrity culture is part of the continuation of the oppressive system under which we live by causing distraction. You know, isn't it?
Well, you've got that wildlife guy at the Camp Out this year, haven't you? What's he called? Chris Packham.
Well, at least he's a bit more. I can kind of understand that he's famous for doing something, you know, to help other animals, even though he may not be perfect. I can more understand someone like him than someone that kind of is famous for playing a guitar, and they kind of just happen to be vegan, so they, you know what I mean? I kind of don't. That doesn't. I mean, I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I think that there are a lot of positive things about events like that as well. But this whole celebrity thing, I just think it's really harmful to society.
You got some pushback. I'm going to disagree with Ronnie's struggle against it. The opposite is struggle to create something new. Oh, okay. So not struggle against.
Yeah, well, I think yes, but you see, in trying to create something new, you kind of will be against the existing system, because the existing system will push back against you, won't they? If you see what I mean. So it's kind of both.
We finished ages ago, Jennifer. Not worry.
But anyway, we're probably going up for a record time here. But that's
I know, it's like a domino effect. I said about an hour ago that we just about had enough time, and so okay. So I think we're 90 minutes over our hour. So
right.
Yeah.
Well, so people are still stayed, to watch.
I know, yeah. Get a life, people. What's the matter with you?
There we go. So I think there might be another of these conferences happening next year. I think they're hoping to hold another one. So
we'll have to have another show next year then.
That'll be interesting. I might be able to spend a bit longer at the one.
Yes,
I go to it.
Well, maybe you'll become a speaker next year, providing that you
are still alive.